Okay, so I'm talking about new archaeological finds and their interpretation connected to the Mongol invasion. And it's, of course, it's connected to the research project which we do and to which this conference is connected. And here I only listed some of the main targets, some of the main goals of the project. And you can see in these main goals that archaeology plays a fairly important role in this respect, namely the publication of the relevant archaeological materials, more from the past, more also from the present, the new research on the battlefield of Muhi, and of course, the integration of historical and archaeological data in a Eurasian context. Now, if we look into a little bit into the historiography of this question, you may find surprising that until quite recently, there was not an intensive archaeological investigation of the problem. There were attempts, but there was not a complex. In fact, the very first summary of this question from an archaeological point of view was my contribution to the so-called big black book edited by Balázs Nagy, which is the best source collection and study collection on the Mongol invasion, unfortunately only available in Hungarian. And there was also another attempt. There was an exhibition in 2007. It was actually connected to the International Genghis Khan exhibition, when colleagues and myself as well, we contributed with a smaller exhibition to this big one with the objects and with the interpretation of the finds from the Mongol invasion time. After that, a very significant development occurred, and we may say that the whole field has changed. Very clear sign of that is a volume, Carmen Miserabile. Of course, it's quoting one of the most important historical sources, which is a collection of essays with the publication of very important things, all from the field of archaeology. It is also a festschrift dedicated to Paluci Horváth András, who is the key figure of human archaeology in Hungary. Now, if we look in a little bit in a more complex way, of course, archaeology should play an important role if it's such a major invasion and changes of the general situation. And we can also look it from a different point, not only in a way that what archaeology can find, what is already known from historical sources, but what are the particular archaeological finds and features, what we normally connect to invasions, war, conquest. Of course, battlefield or battlefield archaeology, nowadays rather called conflict archaeology, hoards, I'm going to speak about jewelry, coins, agricultural tools, archaeological features of clear traces of destruction, desertion, traces of fire, unburied human bodies, traces of killing, and in more general, desertion of sites and settlements. Now, there are new attempts, not only these which I mentioned. Here I only quote a very good example, which is a study on the Mongol campaign, and particularly putting it into the context of the previously described, for example, by Agnes Birtalan, this kind of terrible events, massacres, and so on. And this study was dedicated to the problem, what archaeology can say in this respect. Now, in the first new attempts in archaeology, we can say, going back to the 19th century, were rather connected to the sites of the historical events. And of course, the first attempts of studying the battlefield of Muhi, which was of course rather an unsuccessful attempt. There are no mass graves so far identified and so on. However, in the later decades, particularly in the second half of the 20th century, there were well-defined fields where real important contribution has been made to the study of the Mongol invasion. particularly the study of hordes, then the defense system, fortifications, castle archaeology. More recently, settlement archaeology, abandoned, deserted medieval settlements, which of course can be used as indicators. And then also in a later stage, integration of historical and archaeological data sets into some kind of demographic or settlement pattern issues. And the related field, which is more the consequence, the archaeology of the Cumans, which is a field in Hungary going back for decades. Now, of course, battlefields is the first what comes to the mind when you think about archaeology of these things. Also, we have got two very important, Legnica, Lignitz, and Muhi. So it's clear that if we are talking about archaeology, at one point we have to deal with this. I'm coming back to this at the end of my talk. And of course, we have got these nice images of these battles, but we rather have to deal with them in a more material culture related way if we want to understand the archaeology of these battlefields. So this image depicting Muhi, which is rather a medieval imagination of the battle, should be confronted with the actual archaeological finds, the historical sources, and as you will see, paleo-environmental studies are playing a crucial role in this. Concerning the more recent archaeological attempts, studies and projects connected to the Mongol invasion, in 2012, I've summarized in an article the research situation, and I already noticed at that time that in the last decade, so let's say from around 2000, there was a very significant increase in the number of sites which can be connected directly to the Mongol invasion. And this is due to a number of factors. First of all, these new results were connected to new approaches and to new possibilities, including what we may call motorway archaeology. So the large-scale rescue projects which are connected, for example, to motorway construction. And we know quite well that, for example, in the Great Plain, some of these motorways actually produce the highest number of Mongol invasion-related new sites. The other important factor is community archaeology, mainly metal detector research, which is a very big problem because of the illegal character of this research. But there are more and more what we call museum-friendly metal detectorists, amateur metal detector people who contribute to this research, and their contribution is quite amazing. Furthermore, there were targeted excavations at important sites, deserted churches with fortifications, destroyed monastic sites. I only listed here two, Bugatz and Bizere, or sites mentioned in written sources where archaeological research can say something further important. A very recent one I will mention later, Abauivar, or the earlier and more recent excavations in Budapest on the Pest side. Finally, our research project took into consideration all these aspects, and therefore we want to do now a targeted research project, taking into account all these elements and all these approaches to produce a more comprehensive picture of the Mongol invasion. There are also further horizons for the research, which we also take into consideration in our present project. There is a growing comparative material for the Mongol army, so for the militaria or for the objects connected to this. This is going back as far as Mongolia, the Karakorum excavations, the new excavations in certain Russian areas, in Poland, particularly the archaeological research in some neighboring countries, like in present-day Slovakia. We will hear about that right after this, or in Romania, whether it's in the Transylvanian area, or outside of the Carpathian Basin. These are very crucial new data. And we can also hope for a new comparative material for the archaeology of the Kumans. This is also on the horizon of our research, and this is very helpful for the interpretation of the Hungarian sites as well. Now let's turn first to hoards. Hoards is something which has been acknowledged decades ago, and it's clear that we have got an archaeological horizon here, where particularly the hoards with coins can be well dated to the years, either with the coins to 1238, 39, 1240, 41, which means these coins are connected to the Mongol invasion. However, coins are not only in themselves. First of all, we are talking about different types of hoards, and the objects, particularly which came to light from these hoards, should be compared to grave goods or to settlement finds. And this is a work which has been done by Maria Varga, which has been also published. So we have got now a summary of that. But I can also say, although it has been published very recently, we have got lots of new data even after the publication of this volume. And in this respect, we also have to understand that the emergence of a hoard is a very complex process. So it has a time aspect, whether there is time to hide the things, or it's not time enough to do that, and whether it is found after it or did not. People did not manage to get there. And even if it is a hoard, whether it is found, absolute majority of them are found by accident. And if they were found, did they get to the museum? Are they published? Are they accessible? So we have to take into account that the big number of hoards compared to, let's say, the original of a number of these is still very limited. But there are also other types of things. And here the metal detector research is even more important. Liturgical objects are appearing, fortunately, more now in the museums and not so much on the black market because of the result of this metal detector activity. And they also represent a horizon connected to the Mongol invasion. One very clear example, some archaeological sites where these metal finds are playing a crucial role in the interpretation. This is, for example, the new excavation of Szabolcs-Rosta at Bugac-Péter Monostora, which is a site which was devastated and destroyed by the Mongol invasion, never recovered after that, and produces enormous amount of high quality, mainly church-related objects, which are partly results of metal detecting, partly results of excavations. And this is telling us not only a very important history of the site, but it is contributing to the dating and redating of these objects in the context of the Mongol invasion. Now, if we look into the hoards, we have got, first of all, a typology of them. We are talking about iron objects, which are mainly agricultural tools. There's jewelry. There are coin hoards, which are with foreign coins. There are coin hoards with Hungarian coins, mixed hoards. And this is also an interesting question, why we have these different types. And do we have a spatial distribution pattern of them, which is characteristic? Just to give you a few examples, so this is like a typical hoard from the Mongol invasion. The objects are quite characteristic, but I also would like to underline the fact of the long research history. So it was found by accident in a potato field, but later, archaeologists went there and they made a research and they found more of the hoard. And decades later, with modern metal detectors, specialists went back and they found furthermore elements of the same coin, so, or hoard. So this is an important aspect. Or another one, here, more than 7 decades later, specialists went back and they were able to recover more finds from the same hoard because the better metal detector tools. This is the story here as well. And so we have got not only a growing number of coin hoards, but we have got a growing number of sites where new research also produced new results. Now, this goes on, and one of the most recent one, it will be published in days. It is the excavation of Maria Wolfe in Abauivar. There's a very important hoard which was found. There also the help of the metal detecting was crucial, but this is a hoard which was finally found and excavated by archaeologists. So we know the circumstances. And on top, this is a site which is not somewhere in the neighborhood of a settlement, but it's actually in the middle of an earthwork castle, which is one of the important county centers of Hungary. And it is even more, it is mentioned in the document in 1242 as a particular fortification. So that is absolutely crucial for the interpretation of this. The other thing that these coin hoards are representing also many other questions: financial, money economy, social stratification, and so on. Therefore, the study of them can produce further results. There's new numismatic evidence. The old coin hoards are now redated because there are more recent, better catalogs of the coins with better dating. So it is not only the new finds what we are talking about. And finally, the spatial distribution pattern of these hoards is telling a lot. So there were earlier attempts to figure out what areas were the most affected zones of medieval Hungary concerning the Mongol invasion. You can find these maps in textbooks or in historical atlases, and these are more or less depicting the routes of the army and probably the most devastated areas. If we simply superimpose, like I'm doing it now, on the top of this map, the distribution pattern of the coin hoards, then maybe we can find out something to what extent these earlier reconstructions are reliable, and we can probably understand more about the process. And following that, we are working now on a whole set of indicators, historical sources mentioning destruction, particular archaeological features with unburied bodies or traces of fire and things like that, and coin hoards. So this very colorful picture is superimposed layers of all these indicators, and with the help of them, we try to understand now which area was affected, how much, and which indicator shows what in this respect. And in this context, the evidence for the direct evidence for destruction, killing, and things like that are crucial, just like this image showing a family try to hide in an oven of a house. Now, this direct evidence can be different, and there is an important study to understand the character of them. But what is emerging on the scene is quite unexpected, and this is very much in the Great Plain area. We have got now a growing number of church sites which were fortified in a very short time by earthworks, and some of the excavated sites produce direct evidence for the Mongol invasion, including typical Mongol army pieces in this respect. So, and there is really now dozens of these new sites in this area. So with the new methods. Here is area photography, geophysics, and so on. We can detect more and more of these sites. And in this way, this kind of indicator maps can reveal regional major differences compared to others. Finally, very briefly, about the battlefield of Muhi. Here is the monument of the battle, but it's actually not situated on a spot where we know that something happened. And we have got this enormous amount of nice reconstructions of the battle. I just show some very quickly. And many of these, or most of these, I can say, has very little to say about the actual situation in the landscape or archaeological finds, which were only very recently connected to the actual battlefield. And in this context, we have to take into account the settlement network and particularly the fast-changing environment. And this is one of the results which we have learned from this, let's say, motorway archaeology. Fortunately, one of the motorways is crossing the area, but the other type of research is actually the paleoenvironmental study, in which we are dealing with all kinds of questions, how these rivers were changing in the area, and what was the effect of that on the zone where we can imagine the actual battle. Or what are those river changes which change the settlement network in a fundamental way. And finally, I just would like to show you here the result of this geographical research, which was made by drone and LiDAR, so all kinds of new technologies. And this kind of animation will show you the river changes of the Shoyo in the last 200 years. So if you see this, this is what we are talking about. So in fact, we can conclude that if that was the change in the last 200 years, we have to do a very detailed study. What could have been the effect of the water changes in the last 800 years? And this is quite crucial for the understanding of the battlefield. And in this way, we also found an area with the help of community archaeology, with the help of volunteers, which can be now, I believe, quite well connected to the actual battle. With these objects, typical objects coming from the period of the Mongol invasion. I'm not saying that that's the battlefield. It's a site with one event connected to the battle. The battle was a complex one with a number of related sites, and we hope to find more of these, for which we also have to use all the previously described methods and approaches in archaeology. Thank you for your interest.